And what about Parshuram? he just went and
No,
killed
no,
evil?
definitely not. See, Parshuram had a personal grudge to begin with, which he settled. He settled the score by killing Kartavirya Arjun, who was the antagonist in the story. He did not have to do it 21 times. Same for Lord Ram. He set ideals for the entire society to follow. And in fact, he suggested, in both the cases where he killed Vali and he killed Ravan, he suggested that the next king marry the queen. So Sugriv actually married Tara, who was Vali's wife. And Ram ensured that Angad, who was Vali's son, would be made the heir to the kingdom. Similarly, in Lanka, Vibhishan actually married Mandodari. Not a lot of people know that.
Episodes with Dr. Vineet Agarwal are always stellar. They're some of our most well-received episodes because, as is the case with the best podcast guests, Dr. Vineet Agarwal is extremely well-read, and he doesn't just view his subject of ancient Indian culture as a subject in itself. He views it in conjunction with ancient history, in conjunction with Tantra, in conjunction with science. And these are the elements that we brought to this particular conversation, while it's mostly centered around Kalki, or the reason for the apocalypse according to Indian culture, the final avatar of Vishnu. We also spoke about elements of ancient history. Very, very fascinating conversation. It's conversations like this that become flag post conversations for our team because we know the quality of content packed into these episodes. For more episodes like this, make sure you follow us on Spotify. We're Spotify exclusive, which means that every episode is available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. If you've ever wanted to learn more about Indian culture and not just about Kalki, this is the episode for you. And if this is the first episode with Vineet Agarwal that you're checking out, I promise you, you're going to enjoy all the other episodes. And I also nudge you to check out our Hindi podcast where we've covered even more topics with this mastermind of ancient Indian culture. Dr. Vineet Agarwal returns on the Ranveer Show now. It's going to be a super hit blockbuster podcast with Dr. Vineet Agarwal again. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you so much, Ranveer. It's good to be back.
How do you feel after the last two incredibly well received? Last four, actually, not two.
3.
Oh, 3?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I just lose my sense of logic when
You
it
do
comes.
a lot of podcasts. That's fine.
But each and every one of them was a super hit, man. All crossed 1 million views, which we can't say about a lot of guests. And it's often a great telltale sign about who we should be creating unlimited number of conversations with. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Ranveer. I think it's also a sign of the content that people are looking forward to. It's a lot of people, I think I've realized over the years that a lot of people are invested in knowing about their culture and their heritage, and that knowledge has not been very easily available till now. So I think podcasts like the ones that you have been doing are very, very helpful, be it with Gaur Gopal Das Prabhu or with, Abhijit Chavda sir or with anyone, who is knowledgeable about Indian history and culture. I think that has been the uptake, which has happened over the years.
Yeah, there's certain kind of content that you can only gain from listening to podcasts,
Definitely.
So while people think that, the podcast phase is done, I don't think so. I think there's a lot more knowledge to be unearthed in India. But that's what I think today because you're in front of me. Let's talk about the topic for today. We're going to do a kind of pacey podcast. This one specifically about the Kalki Avatar, which is one of our most highly requested podcasts. I honestly don't know where to begin this conversation. We chalked out 5 points that we'll cover, but maybe the pre-point is a sort of brief outlook on what Kalki is.
Sure.
Think of the word Antichrist, think of the word Messiah, think of the word apocalypse, think of the word future of Hinduism. That's a phrase. But think of these kind of ideas, and that's where the Kalki Avatar lies. How would you firstly like to describe the word Avatar? Secondly, could you give us a brief overview on what Kalki Avatar is?
Sure, Ranveer. So, see, first of all, to begin with, we understand that in Hinduism, there is a trinity, right? So, we spoke about a couple of gods and goddesses in the previous podcast, and we understood that, there's a hierarchy of gods. And Lord Vishnu amongst them, is one of the highest gods amongst the trinity. And he is the person responsible for preserving this universe. He's the maintainer, the preserver of this universe. So the word avatar actually comes from the Puranas, where it is mentioned that Lord Vishnu primarily applies to Lord Vishnu because he's the one who's responsible for this particular function, So he descends on the planet Earth or in other lokas in a different form, not as Vishnu himself, but he takes a specific form to fulfill a specific purpose which is required for that particular time period. And that is avtarit hona. That is the descent of God onto the mortal realm.
Because you've also studied the Shiv Puran, I want to ask you, why isn't there that much of a kind of popularity of Shiva? Because a part of Hinduism, which is Shaivism, considers Shiva as the ultimate. Vaishnavism counts Vishnu as the ultimate.
Right.
So why is there not enough talk about Shiva doing the same?
I think Shiva's purpose itself is different. It's like in an organization when you have different functions. HR is supposed to do something, finance is supposed to do something completely different, and marketing and sales do completely different, functions. So it's very similar for the Trinity, where Brahma is supposed to be responsible for the creation, right? Once creation is done, Brahma's job for that day is over. And then comes into play Vishnu's requirement,
Which is maintenance.
Maintenance, to make sure things are running smoothly. And it's not related to the basic stuff. It's about the maintaining the overall balance of good and evil in the world. And
why is there a need for evil?
Right. I think that's a very interesting question that a lot of people have. Why does evil exist, in the first place? So a lot of scholars have tried to analyze it. Like Swami Vivekananda mentioned that, evil is just the absence of God. So darkness is just the absence of light. So it's the same for evil. Wherever there's a preponderance of ungodly activities or ungodly thoughts, that is what you call evil. And in another way, you can understand evil is associated with ego, right? Whenever you see any example of evil in the world, whether it is from history, whether it is from scriptures, Puranas, epics, Ramayana, Mahabharata, evil, the people we consider evil or overarchingly evil, maybe it's not complete black and white, but shades of gray, where more of gray, more of black is there, in that character. You see a preponderance of ego in that person. That person is driven solely by personal ambition. It's not a concern for development of the society, of the family, of the country, of the nation, of the world. It's about person's own development, own ambition, own greed or lust or bloodlust, So that is evil.
Keeping this in mind, I want to also kind of highlight the yogic aspect of what evil means.
Sure.
This is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. But basically, Hinduism does speak about its own form of Satanism. Like when we say Satan or the devil, it's often a commentary about the evil that's present within everyone's minds.
Right.
And how your mind is a combination of God and the devil.
Right.
God, all the good traits, and the devil, which are all the bad traits, and they're constantly at war.
Yes.
Depending on your habits, your friends, your choices in life,
yes.
you kind of make one of the two more dominant over the other one. Also, keeping this in mind, I remember there used to be this show, B.R. Chopra's Mahabharata, where the start of the show, the theme song was Yada Yada Nidharmasya.
Who can forget that?
Yeah. So that entire shloka talks about the fact that when the evil within the average human's mind becomes more dominant over the God factor,
yes.
that's when God has to take birth in the form of I won't say person, I'll probably say organism on this earth.
A being
on this earth, to flatten things out again.
Right.
And remind people that they need to balance their inner worlds out much more.
Yes.
Some people would even consider things like a pandemic or a worldwide scale disaster a kind of reminder. So now would you say that avatars actually exist as beings, Or would you say that even when nature lashes out at us and says that, no, you'll have polluted this planet too much, you'll have killed too many of the other organisms on this planet, here's your whatever resultant outcome?
Yes.
Is that also an element of an avatar, according to you?
I feel, our understanding of the avatar is very limited to, we generally consider avatar as a entity or a being, where God's personality is visible. The avatar is doing certain things that are out of this world. The avatar may not tell that I am an avatar, but, the kind of things that, for example, Parshuram did, or Krishna did, or Sri Ram did, they are self-evident that this is someone out of the ordinary. When we talk about natural calamities, I feel it's more of a sign of Prakriti or Devi or Shakti, who's the destructive force.
Which is a form of the female aspect of God in
Female aspect
Hinduism.
of God, yes. Prakriti or nature or Maya or, so various philosophies in Hinduism, they talk about Purush and Prakriti, So it's God and the energy. And God may be considered, whether you consider him as Vishnu or as Shiva, Shakti is common, right? Shakti is the female personification of energy. And these natural calamities, I feel, are more of a pushback from nature that we have been overexploiting.
From Mother Nature.
Mother Nature. So she's Mother Nature, she's Shakti, she's Prakriti. She's the one who's responsible. Even in the Vaishnav Purans, Shakti is responsible for maintenance of this entire, the protection of this entire universe. So maintenance, even though it is Lord Vishnu's forte, Shakti is the reason everything is moving. She is the energy behind every single thing that happens in this world. So there's a synergy between the different gods and goddesses, the forms of gods and goddesses that we understand. And we have to realize that, all these are different facets of the same supreme being. So whether God comes down as a human-like person, as Sri Ram, whether he appears as a Vaman or a Kurma or a Matsya, purpose is to balance the forces of good and evil. Whenever you see a natural calamity, you have to understand that this is the female energy that is acting up, which is sort of trying to teach us a lesson. Because we are exploiting nature. I mean, nobody can deny that, right? Nature has been exploited over years, over centuries now. And there has to be a pushback. Even in Mumbai recently also, you must have seen those pictures where, the sea has thrown back all the wastes that was dumped into it. The entire beach, I think at Dadar probably, was littered with plastic. And, it's a clear sign. You take back what's yours. I don't want it, And when you were asking about Shiva and Vishnu, I think that's a very basic thing that we need to understand about these gods and goddesses is that scientifically, what do these principles mean? Shiva is time, right? So everything happens in due course of time. Lord Vishnu can come today as Kalki. He can wipe out evil. But no, he will come at a certain time. So there is always an element of Shiva in whatever Vishnu does.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. So they are not mutually exclusive, right? And similarly, goddess energy, without the energy, Tantra says that, without the Shakti, Shiva can be considered a shav.
What does that mean?
A corpse, which does not sound very good, but that is what Tantra says. So what it means is that they are not mutually exclusive again. The female and the male propensities or the female or the male energies are not mutually exclusive. That is the whole reason of showing God as Ardhanarishwar. There are various forms of God where he's depicted as Harihar, Vishnu and Shiva combined. So these are ways to make us understand that, stop being sectarian and stop, picking your favorite gods and fighting over it. These are just different facets of the same supreme being.
100%. That's one hack we actually use to get more clicks on our videos, because people, for some reason, all over India are very concerned when there are fights happening. It's why we see so many of these rappers, dissing each other and all that, and it just gets views. Like, people want to bring that diss culture even to talk about ancient culture.
Right.
Even to talk about God.
Yes.
Keeping that in mind, I have to bring you to the brief outlook on Kalki. For someone who's got no idea what Kalki even means, where do you even begin this conversation?
Right. So Kalki is the last and final avatar who's supposed to come descend on this planet. It is Lord Vishnu's avatar, and in the popular list of 10 avatars, this will be the 10th or the last one.
And it's not arrived yet.
It hasn't arrived yet. It is predicted to arrive towards the end of Kali Yuga.
Okay.
So there's a long time to go. But there are various aspects of Kalki that have been described, such as where he would be born, what would be the name of his parents, who is he going to marry, what are the feats that he's going to perform in his life, the name of his vehicle, a horse, a divine horse, the kind of weapons he'll be using, who he'll be praying to, and who will be the villain in the story.
You give me details, I see views, Dr. Vineet. But what I will definitely say to the listeners during this conversation is we're going to bring in elements of ancient human history here. We're going to be talking about weapons. We're going to be talking about a human being's process of evolution. Of course, we're going to be talking about cultural inputs from our Purans. We've divided this particular episode into 5 sections. The first section is all about ancient human history, because we have to kind of look at all this from a scientific perspective also. So I was listening to this amazing podcast with someone called Randall Carlson. He was on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I highly recommend that listeners go check out all of Randall Carlson's episodes. His subject is ancient history before we learned how to write.
Right.
Now, he spoke about how roughly 2 lakh years ago, the first Homo sapien had arrived. So if you took that particular Homo sapien and put normal clothes on that person and made them walk around, you wouldn't even come to know that it's someone from ancient history. They look just like us.
Right.
But our written records can only trace back up to about 10,000 years ago.
Yes.
I'd probably say around 10,000 BC, because now we know that the Rig Veda is written roughly at about that time.
Right.
So lots of people consider the Rig Veda the oldest text in the world.
Yes.
Would I be right in saying that?
Definitely.
Okay. And would you say 10,000 BC is roughly the mark?
So, some verses that mention some astrological conjunctions, etc., they can be traced to around that time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, although the Rig Veda wasn't written down for the longest time, it was passed orally. Most of scriptures were passed down orally through generations, and then they were written down. So it would not be correct to say that it was written down at that time. It was definitely composed much earlier.
Gotcha.
And some of the verses do mention some astral conjunctions that correspond to roughly around that period.
Okay. What I also want to highlight here is when you do 2 lakh minus 12,000, because 10,000 BC was 12,000 years ago, you have 1,88,000 years of human history, which we know very less about.
Yes.
Because over that kind of a time period, even bones degrade.
Definitely.
Even plastic, which we know today, would degrade in like 2,000 to 3,000 years.
Right.
All the plastic that we know. So even if some human civilization had created plastic way before us, we don't have a trace of that.
True.
The only thing that could survive 1,88,000 years and probably meteor showers and ice ages and natural calamities is rock formations or stones, like the pyramids would have survived,
Yes.
or just anything made out of rock.
Yes.
Which is why we have elements from the Stone Age which are still prevalent.
True.
So we kind of know what was happening a little bit before, say, 2 lakh years ago.
Right.
And then from this period of 2 lakh years to about 10,000 BC, we don't know what happened.
True.
Now, parallelly, when I'm a nice Hindu boy and I study the Vishnu Puran and I study the 10 avatars, 1,88,000 years is a long enough time for 9 avatars to have happened, according to me.
Right.
When was Buddha, which is the last mentioned avatar, when did he exist?
So
roughly?
there's a bit of controversy about that as well, but most scholars say around between 500 to 600 BC.
Okay, which is fairly recent.
Which is fairly recent. And that's fine because, Buddha was supposed to have come down in Kali Yuga, So, and Kali Yuga is what started around 3102 BC according to Aryabhatta. So,
and which also corresponds with Krishna's death, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So it was only after Krishna left this planet that Kali could begin his reign. And Kali, because you were talking about Satan earlier, Kali is the closest Hindu counterpart that you can find to Satan. Because Kali is supposed to live in 4 places, right? And one is where there's alcohol consumed. One is where there's illegal sex, illicit sex, maybe prostitution. Where there is gold, money, materialism, gambling dens. So, these are the kind of places where Kali is supposed to thrive. So this is the closest you can come to the concept of Satan in Hinduism.
Again, it makes me go back to that thing about Kali's present within all of us.
Right.
It's just that it's probably elevated in these 4 places.
Yes. Because these 4 places they tend to bring out the worst in you. In a gambling den, you're frustrated, you're angry if you're losing, right? The anger, in a different place, in a tavern where you're drinking, where alcohol is being served, you kind of lose your ability to control yourself. The faculties are inhibited. Inhibition is inhibited, basically, right? You become more free. And you tend to act out on those tendencies that are coming in your mind. So a lot of these places, Kali rules because of your baser instincts becoming more prominent. And that's what a devil or Satan is supposed to do, right? He's supposed to turn you into a bad person. And that is exactly what Kali is doing here. So coming from a perspective of history, there's a huge period that is missing because of the ice ages also. So there's a very long ice age, which started around 1.5 lakh years ago. It lasted till about 10,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, roughly, I think. So there is a lot that could have got covered or buried under the snow.
Which is what, there's another historian called Graham Hancock, and his life's entire mission is uncovering aspects of different world cultures that the world has forgotten. For example, in India, he is doing a lot of deep sea diving right outside Tamil Nadu and the coasts of India generally to find out basically lost cities.
Definitely.
Because technically in an ice age, what happens? Massive ice glaciers get formed all over the world. For ice to get formed, you need water. But there's a limited amount of water on the earth. Where's that water coming from? It's probably coming from the oceans, which freeze out, become huge glaciers. So that effectively means water levels go down.
Sea levels, go down.
Over tens of thousands of years. And then you have an opportunity to create cities where today oceans exist.
Exactly. That's why all over the world, across the populated regions, if you do research in any of the bays or coastlines where there is still a lot of population abiding, you find a lot of excavations, you find a lot of remnants of the past. It's just that we still haven't explored. In India, I don't know why, for what reason, we stopped the exploration, after the discovery of Dwarka. Even that wasn't fully explored, I feel. And there is a lot more that can be done. So Graham Hancock did do a lot of good work in finding out some of these, lost arcs of civilization, along our coast. But that being said, there's also an evolution in the mindset of humanity. When we're talking about the early human beings 2 lakh years ago, they would not probably think the way we do. Right? I think, for the early man, it was a struggle to survive in a harsh environment. And when the ice ages happened, a major chunk of humanity vanished. And it was only in the tropics, which is, maybe parts of Middle East, Africa, India, tropical regions where humanity had reached by that time.
Near the Aztec and Mayan civilizations also.
Yeah, that happened quite late, actually. Aztec and Mayan civilizations, humanity, I think the last episode we spoke about the movement of populations across the Bering Strait into the Americas, which happened very, very late. Majorly, the humanity was concentrated in this part of the world.
This is Afro-Asia.
And even here, it was the tropical zones which had been inhabited. So there are genetic studies that show the original aborigines of Australia are connected to the people living in Andamans. And, so some people must have taken the sea route and some people went through the land. And then the ice ages happened. So people were stuck wherever they were. So most of the development happened only in these regions. Rest of the world was inhabited by living beings, but not Homo sapiens. In Europe, there were the Neanderthals, there were other species all over the globe.
I think Denisovan was in Asia.
Yes,
Was
yes.
Russia and like Japan and these places.
Yes. And here in India also, there have been different species, sort of subspecies which were discovered, the Ramapithecus and Shivapithecus,
Wow,
which were
really?
discovered. Yeah.
Wait.
They've been named after Indian gods, but there are species that were discovered in the Shivalik Hills, in Nepal.
Which are
the
cousins
mountains.
of Homo sapiens?
Yes.
Wow.
So they were definitely hominids. They're called hominids. There were definitely hominids here. There's evidence of tools, ancient tools being used right from there's a Soan Valley, there's a region of Pakistan, India, Nepal. In Rajasthan, there have been discoveries of stone tools, etc. So, and of course, in the central part of the country where it is postulated that most of the migrations from Africa into India were located around the center, probably because they came through the sea. And the central region had the oldest inhabitants of this continent, of the subcontinent.
The central region.
Central region of India.
Like Madhya Pradesh.
Madhya Pradesh. So most of the tribals that you find, the most ancient tribes, the Gonds and the other tribes in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, they are all centered around that region, right?
Gotcha.
And these people were probably the original inhabitants of this country. That is not to say that there was a migration of Aryans or there was a migration of Dravidians. No, they moved into different parts of the country. They moved to the north, they moved to the south, they developed different characteristics. There was intermingling of populations, of course, of successive batches coming out of Africa, etc. A lot could have happened. But it is postulated that the central region of the country had the oldest inhabitants.
Speaking about this central region of India, of course, we've covered a lot of aspects of the same concept with Abhijit Chavda. And he talks about how very likely during the Ice Age, because it was this one strip of land that was inhabited, culture had probably developed here.
Yes.
And once the earth started warming up in its most recent warming up phase, because even warming up and cooling down happens cyclically. In its most recent warming up phase, people moved from here towards parts of Europe.
Right.
And that's why you see so many parallels between Greek culture, Roman culture, the ancient culture of Syria, which I feel again is an offshoot of ancient Hindu culture.
Yes.
And the same could be said about the Southeast as well. It's because most of the human population was centered around this region.
Yes.
I think in the last podcast, we spoke about all the parallels between Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. It could have been an offshoot of the same seed religion.
Right.
We don't have to say, oh, this one came first or that one came first.
Yes.
It's probably some third thing that came first, out of which we are both offshoots.
So, Ranveer, you're very right. A lot of Western scholars tend to start with the premise that, civilization moved into India. But the genetic studies have proved otherwise, that people moved out of India, So, it's counterintuitive to say that, while people moved out, civilization moved in. Doesn't really make any logical sense, right? So it has to be, and our Purans actually talk about people moving out. There's a story of a king called Yayati, and Yayati had 5 sons. And it's a very interesting story where, this king Yayati, he did not want to relinquish his throne, right? And he did not, even though he had 5 very able sons, he did not want to let go of the pleasures that come with being a king, right? The luxuries and the pleasures that come with being a king. So he asks one of his sons to exchange their youth with him. Okay. So most of his sons refuse. They're like, you have lived your life. It's our time. You should relinquish the throne, go to the forest, take sannyas and give it to us, right? The throne. So none of them agree except one. And that kid is the youngest. And he's ultimately made the king later on, because Yayati is very happy with his sense of sacrifice, that he's ready to sacrifice his life for the sake of his father. And the other 4 are banished. And they move out in different directions. So the story says that some of them actually move to the west. So Anu, Dhruyu, they moved towards the west, I think, if I remember correctly. There was some Turvasha, I think, moved towards the south. There was another, Yayati moved towards, Yadu moved towards the west. So you have Yadavs centered around the western region. And Puru remain in the center. So that's where the kingdoms of Hastinapur, etc., they came up later. So, and one of the suns moved towards the eastern direction. So, there is a Puranic legend which tells us that people did move out. They did take this civilization out of our borders, across our borders. And even in later literature, you see the term called Yavanas. So Yavana refers to Greeks in the historical times. When Alexander came, Yavana used to refer to a Greek. And Yavana is actually derived from Anu. So Anu's descendants were the Anavs, which probably became Yavanas later. So these were the people who moved in a western direction. There's a very clear-cut, story mentioned in our Purans. And even otherwise, if you see the scriptures, the geographical descriptions in the Rig Veda, the oldest parts of Rig Veda talk about the rivers around the Indian subcontinent. They don't really talk about rivers in the west. And as you move to the later aspects of Rig Veda or later parts of Rig Veda, you start seeing preponderance of western rivers.
Wow.
So it's a very interesting study, and I don't know why people like to keep flogging a dead horse and again keep talking about the same theory which has no basis. You're
talking about the Aryan invasion.
The Aryan invasion theory. It has no basis, no logic.
It's got geopolitical significance.
Exactly. That's it. And it serves them to keep the theory alive. And of course, even in India, there is a sort of a political movement against, the Aryan and Dravidian divide. So there is there's a geopolitical strategy to it, but otherwise it doesn't make sense, And yeah.
Speaking about this whole 4-direction concept, it's there in the Ramayana as well. When Ram takes the help of Sugriv, who's supposed to be the king of the Vanaras or the monkeys.
Yes.
I mean, that's what people understand the word Vanaras as.
Yes.
So they send 4 troops, one in each direction, and the one that goes towards the south finds Sitama in Lanka, which is, I think, headed by Hanuman. Yeah, obviously.
Yes.
Now, my question here is, we mentioned Denisovans and Neanderthals, and I'm saying this very respectfully. Could there have been a possibility that the Vanaras that we read about was some sort of cousin of the Homo sapien?
Very likely.
Okay.
It's a definite possibility. I think it will be foolish to refuse that it's a possibility even,
When do you think the Ramayana would have happened?
Well, according to scriptures, it was a really long time ago because it did not happen in this cycle. It happened in the 24th Mahayuga.
Which could have been when?
Millions of years ago, actually.
Millions of years ago.
So for us, currently we are in the 28th Mahayuga, 28th cycle. And Ramayana happened in the 24th Mahayuga. So there have been there's been a long time,
If there's listeners listening to this with skeptical ears, what I also want to say is, human beings today are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to the pyramids. That's what people don't understand about timelines and history.
Yes.
I don't know about millions of years ago, but I'm ready to believe at least 1 lakh.
Definitely.
Maybe 1.5 lakhs.
Yes. So the theory of yugas and, the duration of yugas is not very well understood even till now.
Okay.
Not a lot of people have been able to decipher it completely, including myself.
There's these micro schools in Hinduism which war against each other. And my opinion on the yugas is the ultimate.
Yes. And there's this whole theory of ascending and descending yugas, which actually does not find basis in scriptures. A lot of people do follow it or do believe in it, but none of the scriptures actually talk about an ascending or a descending yuga. It's a cycle. It's a continuous cycle. So whenever it happened, whether it was millions of years ago or thousands of years ago, the fact is that, there would be different species existing at that time, And I feel it's very, very likely.
I can't believe how much I'm quoting the Randall Carlson episode, but there was one more crazy factor that, it kind of goes in line with the things you're saying. Like, while we know that the presence of human beings has always been harmful towards all animals, like, so much of it is written in Sapiens as well. Like, wherever we went, we destroyed the animal kingdom of that place. We also need to keep in context that 99% of all animals that have ever existed have now gone extinct.
Yes.
What we know of as all the possible species in the world that are present today, they're 1% of whatever's existed on Earth.
Right.
And we don't even know what we don't know.
And same is true probably for other species also, because Homo sapiens was the smartest. We could have easily wiped out the others. And it is said that, there was definitely intermingling of the species where, Neanderthals, if I'm not mistaken, it's said that, the light eyes of colors, it's come down from Neanderthals
Yeah.
in Europe. You
Yeah.
know, so
There is Neanderthal blood in Caucasian humans of today.
Yes. So there was a definite intermingling. We have stories about intermarriages of species between devas, asuras, between humans, manavs, apsaras, between vanars and other species. So probably these refer to different kinds of subspecies of humans that were existing at that time, which we haven't discovered or we haven't found the connection.
Yeah. It's like when you study the timeline of the Earth, which is billions of years old, you basically kind of look at yourself as just some sort of advanced fungus that's growing on this planet that's conducive to the growth of fungus.
Yes.
But anyway, go on.
So, no, that reminds me, in school and science, I remember, there was an analogy of if you plot the history of the Earth on a clock, human beings have appeared right, I think, at the last second of the clock striking 12.
Yeah.
So that's how young we are. And then we presume to believe that, we know everything that has happened on this planet.
Yeah. Just in the last 10 years, so much history has been disproven, be it Graham Hancock's work, stuff that Randall Carlson talks about, stuff that the internet and the podcasting cultures kind of uncovered. Like I learn so much every time I speak to you. But maybe before we just head into that Kalki conversation, which we've still not begun.
I know, we haven't reached
in
there
a
yet.
Kalki themed podcast. That's the joy of podcasting, honestly. Keeping in mind this Vanara theory, do you know anything more about Vanaras? Vanars.
Yeah. So I think there has been some sort of research which has been done, where people have postulated that, when humans migrated out of Africa, and since there is a connection between Aborigines of Australia and the tribals of, Andamans or some remote places within India, there's a theory that probably these could be the first humans who have migrated out of Africa.
So it's kind of a racist theory.
It's not really a racist theory, but it is more of a developmental theory, where they were the more primitive humans. It may not necessarily be related to a race. It is the same. Humans, ultimately, we were the same, right? We all looked the same. When we moved out of Africa, we were all probably black, right? Because there were no selective genes that we were exposed to that got, because light skin and different other adaptations came when we moved to different climates.
Yeah, and I think Abhijit Chawda had mentioned that it takes about just 10 generations for you to look drastically different according to the climate you're living in.
So when we moved out of Africa, probably all of us looked the same. But it was just, when you move out and you're exposed to a new place, new challenges, your brain develops more. And, from a early man stage to today's modern human, we are
So just to be clear, when they're talking about Vanars, it's not black people, because
definitely
on a lot of Western podcasts, they actually say that it's a racist theory.
No, not at all.
It's probably some precursor to Homo sapiens.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yes, definitely. It does not in any way mean a race. It is probably a civilization or a culture which was not as developed as today's Homo sapiens. And because you clearly see, right, they lived in jungles, they lived in caves. They followed a rule which was very similar to the rule of, a forest where might is right, whereas in a city from where Ram had come, the whole encounter between Ram and Vali, it clearly shows the opposite ends of spectrum of values, where Ram says that as an older brother, Vali should have protected Sugriv because he's the younger brother. Instead, Vali has thrown him out, taken his wife. And, Vali is countering it by saying that, might is right, and Vali had a boon. Nobody could have defeated him. So it's not fair. Whereas in a civilization, in a civilized world, Ram says that you are supposed to take care of your younger brother like your son. How do the weak survive in this world? Only when civilization exists. In the jungle or in the forest, weak don't survive. Weak are wiped off. It's the slowest animal that is captured by a lion. The slowest deer or fawn is what gets pounced upon. So only in a civilized world can the weak survive.
Yeah, again, I think as listeners and as people who study this culture, we need to bring emotion out of the conversation and see it for what it was. See it based on the information we're given. See it almost from a scientific basis.
Right.
You're given a certain number of facts, figures, sentences in these scriptures. You tie it into modern day logic. You know, when concepts like this are pitched where, okay, the Vanar Sena could have been some sort of primitive version of the Homo sapien. Don't get offended by it. It's so it's so silly to get offended by it. That means you're letting your emotional side take over your logical side. And again, we're saying this from a place of respect.
Yes, of course. We are trying to understand as much as anyone else. You know, we are trying to make sense of it. By having these discussions. It's not disrespectful in any way to anyone. We believe in the divinity of Hanuman, the same as we believe in the divinity of Lord Ram. You know, it does not disrespect any of them by saying if, you know, one was coming from the cities and another from a different culture which was based in the forest.
Yeah, so much to unpack here, man. This is why I love the history that you learn after school or college. Anyway, coming back to the topic, you were talking about how other cultures also speak about what they call an antichrist or what they call a messiah or what they call, just some form of God that visits earth for a purge.
Yes.
I think even in ancient Judaism, when they're talking about Moses and his story, there are so many dark elements that God sends to test human beings of ancient Egypt at that time.
Right.
So there's always this fierce element of God that is supposed to visit earth. One of the avatars of Vishnu was Parshuram, who's supposed to be alive till today, who's a Chiranjeevi, who's gone beyond life and death. And his whole purpose was violent.
Yes.
Does Kalki have a violent purpose as well?
Completely. I think the whole Kalki is the Parshuram for the modern era, you know. So there is absolutely no denying the fact that Kalki will be a violent person, you know. But it is not senseless or mindless violence. You know, there's a purpose to it. And Kalki's purpose is to rid the world of the Asuric forces or the demonic forces or the forces of evil.
Got it. You have any input from other cultures?
So there are, references of similar messiahs coming towards the end of towards the judgment day. The Abrahamic religions, they call it the judgment day, when the world is going to end. And that's when the judgment of all the souls, all the people who have passed away would be done, you know, whether you go into heaven or hell. So towards the end of the world, you know, when the judgment day is about to happen, in Christianity, there is a prediction of a fourth horseman coming, you know. If I'm not mistaken, fourth or the fifth horseman coming. And I think it's fourth. And the horseman is supposed to be very similar to Kalki, you know, in the sense that Kalki is riding a divine horse called Devdat, you know, and Kalki is supposed to rid the entire world of the evil kings. And the horseman is supposed to do exactly the same, where, you know, it's mentioned that the armies of earth would be aligned to face the horseman. But still he would smite them, you know, with a sword and stuff. It's very similar. And again, even in Islam, there's a mention of a Hazrat coming to establish the principles again. You know, there's differences in the opinion, whether he's already appeared, whether he's going to come. But there is a mention of a similar concept. In Buddhism, you know, there's a very strong belief, especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, which is, people would know Tibetan Buddhism, you know, because whenever you go to Manali or McLeodganj, or everybody comes back with the prayer flags, right, on their bikes and on their vehicles. So that Tibetan Buddhism, it's called Vajrayana Buddhism. And in that Buddhism, there's a belief in scriptures called Kal Chakra. And it is believed that these Kal Chakra teachings were actually passed on by Gautam Buddha to the first king of that lineage. And there's about 32 kings in that lineage. And the last one of them would correspond to the Kalki that we know from our scriptures. So multiple religions, multiple beliefs mention the coming back of a Messiah.
Which brings us to the second part of this podcast.
Finally.
2 out of 5. What's said about the life of Kalki? According to our scriptures, there is a Kalki Purana.
Yes.
As I've been told by you. So I would love to know, where do you even begin this story?
So Kalki's story comes from various sources. Kalki Puran is a Up Puran. So, you know, there are major Purans, which are more historical, more authentic. And then there are the Up Purans that are centered around certain deities. And
You mean like future predictions?
some future, some past, but the Up Purans are more focused in their approach, whereas the other Purans are more expansive in the coverage. And like Vishnu Puran, Shiv Puran, they are some of the major 18 Purans. And then there are the Upa Purans that are, again, some count 18, some count more than 18. And Kalki Puran is one of the Upa Purans. But that is not to say that it is less authentic or less believable, because the prediction of Kalki comes from all the major Purans. Whether it is the Padma Puran, there's the Matsya Puran, there's, I think in the Shiv Puran also, Bhagavad Puran definitely, Vishnu Puran definitely, they mention the coming of Kalki. And they also sort of give us a background of how things would be, of the Kali age, of how Kali Yuga is going to be. And it's very much in line with what we see around, It's small things like, just a person who has a lot of property would be considered respectful. Right? It's not because of the knowledge he possesses, it's because of the money that he possesses. Kings would tax people so much that they would have to leave their belongings and go and live in forests and caves, So we are coming to that stage slowly that, people are getting fed up of, the life in cities, because of the cost or expenditure which is involved. And when we talk about taxes, we just think of income tax, right? That's not it. The indirect taxes, they take away so much of your income or your, kitty that you have. So there is things like, only consent between a boy and girl would be enough for a marriage, which is what happens, right, today. And it was actually one of the aspects of, one of the ways to get married, Gandharva Vivaha in ancient India. But that was a rarity.
I didn't get this point.
So they say that in Kali Yuga, this will be the way things would happen.
No, the consent.
Yeah, so a consent between a boy and girl is enough for getting married.
Versus what?
Versus the consent of families.
Oh, okay.
Right? So
you see? Damn!
So you see that happening. Right?
Whoa, sorry mom, sorry dad.
So which may not be a bad thing per se, but I'm just saying that they are narrating the circumstances that we will be living in. And and these are the milder things that I'm talking about. If you actually go into the details, it's quite scary that people would have a life of about 20 to 30 years. Puberty would start happening at 11 years. And you see a lot of that thing, happening already. You see school kids getting into a lot of stuff which they shouldn't, or which...
You're describing my life, Dr. Agarwal.
So we are in Kali Yuga, yes.
Man, sorry, Kalki Devta. Go on.
But still things are not as bad, right? So the Kalki Puran says that Kalki would appear, and even the other Purans mention that he would appear when there is a complete decimation of religion or godliness in the world. It will be only one Varna of people. So Varna is translated in English into caste, but that is not what it means. It means there'll be only disbelievers. There'll be mostly atheists in the world, when God appears. And one purpose of God appearing again is to establish religion or dharma.
Do you feel there's only atheists in the world?
I think there are a lot of them, but I don't think we've reached that stage yet. And that's why Kalki hasn't arrived yet.
I believe Europe is facing some massive atheism problem, right?
Yes,
if I'm not mistaken, this is what I've heard in dinner table conversations.
Yes.
Do you know anything about it?
Not in detail, but that's bound to happen because... You see, that's how religions evolve. Even in India, if you see, there was a time our grandparents were more religious than us, right? Or more religious than our parents.
Yeah.
Probably, I think we are we are more religious than our parents' generation because we're trying to find out things which they didn't. They never did or they never could.
Maybe also because we spot our parents' traumas.
Probably. And I think we also have a lot more opportunity to do that. With internet being available, with podcasts being available, with books being available and easily accessible, I think it's easier for us.
Which makes me question that 2 out of the 3 boxes are ticked, but I would personally like to believe we're going into a more theist world. Which means that worse times are going to happen after that.
Yes.
But right now we might be headed into better times. That's what I like to think.
Let's hope so. But there's a lot happening in the world outside India, right, which is not very good.
Yeah.
And we're talking just our neighbors. You see what's happening in Sri Lanka. Without getting into the geopolitics of it, we all know what are the reasons, but I have been to Sri Lanka so many times, and it's very, very disappointing for me to see that country, get into ruin and chaos like this.
Because of human greed.
Because of human greed. And that's what Kali Yuga is. This is predicted to happen all over the world. And we see it happening in countries across, even in our neighborhood, even across the borders, across geographies, in different parts, different hemispheres, we see that happening, countries attacking each other, and the war has still not ended, right? And there's predictions of something like that happening in the future as well, probably from Asia itself. So a lot of things are very precariously situated right now, We can't say where we are headed. We can't say whether we are headed into good times or bad times. But Kalki is going to appear when the times are really bad.
Yeah. Breaking away from this Hinduism-oriented conversation, which I absolutely love, we got to talk about something else that I discovered recently, which is in line with apocalyptic predictions for the near future. Have you heard... See, I'm so excited to talk about this. Have you heard of something called the Hopi apocalyptic prediction?
No,
Hopi
I haven't come
people,
across it.
Hopi.
I've heard about the people, but haven't heard about this prediction.
So it's one of the Native American tribes.
Right.
And when it comes to America, we all know how massive that landmass is. What we don't understand is before white people dominated America, there was the Native Americans, what in India we call, which apparently is a racial slur now, but we refer to as Red Indians. Now, if you actually study Native American culture, which is spread across USA, Canada, and some people would even argue that it's stretched into South America.
Yes,
which
definitely.
It's the same kind of ethnicity.
Yes.
Native ethnicity.
Yes.
So the Hopi culture, very interesting concept, not spoken about enough. Even on YouTube, I found like one good video which we'll link down below. It's just an audio file about how the Hopis predicted World War 1, 2 and 3.
Oh, very interesting.
And the third one is in line with the times that they describe right now.
So there you go.
Yeah, and even geopolitically speaking, thanks to the Chavda culture, thanks to what Abhijit Chavda spoke about on the show, and thanks to all the army folks and the navy folks and the air force people that we meet on the show.
Right.
I do believe, I hate saying this and I'm not taking part in fear mongering here, but I'm seeing some tough times ahead from a geopolitical scenario, which might point towards some sort of a war. Now, when you tie this into what the Hopi culture predicts, it's just scary, man. They talk about the formation of the UN, the League of Nations. They talk about how the Native Americans wanted to be a part of the League of Nations and the UN as a separate country, because that time they weren't a part of the United States of America. They were counted as sort of an independent group of people.
Yeah. Right.
And both times they were rejected badly. They also spoke about 4 chief cultures of the world. India was not mentioned. That's before you guys get hopeful.
Right.
They spoke about generally African culture. I think its headquarters was supposed to be in Kenya. They spoke about Native American culture. Headquarters was near this Hopi civilization, which I don't know where it was, in which part of USA.
Right.
They spoke about white culture, headquartered in Europe around Switzerland. And they spoke about Asian culture, headquartered in Tibet. I don't know where India would fall in this. Would it be a part of Asian or would it be a part of Native American? And I'll tell you why I say this. They said that all 4 cultures represented 4 different elements. So the white culture represented fire and they were responsible for taking the world forward.
Right.
Like movement, technology,
the engine of the
invention.
world.
The black culture was the chief of the elements. It represented water. And they were responsible for reminding the world of both power and humility. And that's what that particular race is blessed with.
Right.
The Asians were responsible for the element of air, and they were responsible also for spiritual growth.
Okay.
Like we talk about it in our culture, chi, pran.
Right.
And I love the idea that possibly spirituality came out of India, but I have my doubts with it. It couldn't have just been our landmass.
Right.
Possibly Tibet, China, these places had to have played a role. They're around the same geography, similar teachings.
Right.
We have to look at it from a macro scale. You can't be like, oh, everything was India.
Yes.
So that's why I kind of agreed with this theory. And they spoke about their own culture, which is Native American, which I assume is spread over North America and South America. And they said that their culture was very in sync with nature's elements. And you
Right.
see elements of that in ancient shamanic cultures from South
Yes.
America, where they know about plants, mushrooms,
Yes.
their version of Ayurveda, their version of this psychedelic spirituality,
Yes.
their understanding of animals, the Amazon rainforest in general.
Right.
So it made a lot of sense to me. And they said that for total world peace to last, the four cultures have to come together and work towards world peace. You have to
Right.
remember we all came out of the same family.
Right.
We're all one. And I love that message, more than rather than saying, oh, India's better than China. Oh, India's better than everyone else. You have to think of the fact that at the end of the day, there's a human being sitting in Slovenia, there's a human being sitting in Ethiopia, there's a human being sitting in Brazil. And we're all
Yes.
effectively the same.
I think, that's the next step for humanity. And I think Kalki will sort of help in achieving us, in us achieving that. So we can also see that in India happening a bit, right? So I think irrespective of the race or the color involved, the boundaries of nations have to break. The nation state came out as a historical thing, where when the nations were growing. So when you have that feeling of patriotism, you work towards development of the society. And that is how our ancient cultures were. They were always inculcating these values that would help the society develop more than the individual. So whenever you see an individual hankering for more than what the society can provide, you see a villain coming out of it, whether it's Duryodhan, whether it is Ravan, whether it is any other asur from the scriptures. But whenever you see an individual striving to bring equanimity and progress, you see godliness coming in the form of an avatar. Whether it is Krishna, who, he enshrined inclusiveness. He was born as a prince, but he was left as a baby, to grow with cowherds. And, still he grew up to become a kingmaker. The kind of situations and circumstances he dealt with, there were so many attempts at his life, even when he was a baby. And he survived. And whether you believe in the stories or not, whether you believe they were exaggerations, there were definitely some historical basis to that, right? But he faced all those circumstances to emerge as a person who would bring India back to a place from where it can grow spiritually, right? Same for Lord Ram. He set ideals for the entire society to follow. He was the ideal son, he was the ideal brother, he was the ideal enemy. Even as an enemy, he did not allow the Vanar troops to ransack, the harem of Lanka, which is what Ravan used to do. He used to abduct women in thousands from the kingdoms that he was destroying and devastating. And in fact, he suggested, in both the cases where he killed Vali and he killed Ravan, he suggested that the next king marry the queen. So Sugriv actually married Tara, who was Vali's wife. And Ram ensured that Angad, who was Vali's son, would be made the heir to the kingdom. So that there would be no civil war in the kingdom. Similarly, in Lanka, Vibhishan actually married Mandodari. Not a lot of people know that.
Mandodari is Ravan's wife.
Ravan's wife. So Vibhishan actually married Mandodari. And, again, probably to avoid a civil war. So a lot of things can be looked at a perspective of, a godliness or evil, presence of evil or good, depends on what you're doing for personal greed versus what you're doing for the society.
And what about Parshuram? he just went and killed
No, definitely
evil?
not. See, Parshuram had a personal grudge to begin with, which he settled. He settled the score by killing Kartavira Arjun, who was the antagonist in the story. He did not have to do it 21 times. The only reason he continued doing it because he saw the condition of other people was also the same as his. Where, everybody, in the world, a big chunk of population was suffering because of evil and corrupt rulers.
This is why I want to highlight our Hindi podcast. I mean, a lot of our listeners don't understand Hindi and this message is not for you. But for the ones that do, there's so many of our English listeners which don't even know about the existence of a Hindi podcast where we've actually broken down these kind of topics.
Yes,
and Hindi, this local dialect of ours, can bring a different kind of emotion to storytelling and content.
Definitely. So we had a very good podcast on Parshuram.
Yeah.
So, just want to highlight, because we're talking about Kalki, that Parshuram was the previous Kalki. He was a Kalki in the previous era where he did exactly the same thing. He killed the evil and corrupt kings.
Yeah.
And he did it not for himself. It was nothing that benefited him in any way. In fact, it was a tedious task to roam around the world, finding evil kings and killing them. Right? And he was ready to do it even till the times of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Imagine, that's a massive responsibility. I would be like, I'm done with 21 times and now I'm resting. But he was still ready to do that.
Coming back to the story, so I think we covered like the general commentary about the Messiah. We covered aspects of the time. Would you like to cover the story in brief?
Sure, why not? I think it's a very interesting story, and it's very reminiscent of the previous avatars, wherein they do a lot of grand things, and they achieve a lot of grand feats. And there's a bit of romance, there's a bit of action.
Romance?
In Kalki's story, yes, of course. Which of the avatar? I mean, not all avatars had a counterpart, a spouse, but in Ram's story, the entire abduction and rescue of Sita adds the bit of romance, between the husband and wife. In Krishna's story, of course, there's the gopis earlier, and then Rukmani and the Ashtabharya, and a lot of people don't know those parts of the story, where Krishna had to go through a lot of struggle to get each of the princesses to marry. So Kalki's story has a bit of everything, a bit of romance, action, a bit of larger than life imagery, grand battle, multiple grand battles, quintessential villain, which is Kali. And again, a lot of people don't realize there's a difference between the villain Kali and Kali. A lot of especially Western followers, I realize, they confuse between the two. Kali and Kali are completely different. Kali is a goddess and Kali is the demon, right? And I think it's also because of the way goddess Kali has been represented in some Western movies earlier, like Sindbad and all, where they showed her being controlled by a tantric, etc. So there's a misrepresentation of Kali in the Western hemisphere, which gives rise to this confusion. So let me clear that once and for all, that Kali is different from Kali. So Kali is the villain in Kalki's story. And interestingly, since we mentioned Kali, I would also like to highlight here that in Tantra, there is a concept where Kali is equated with Krishna. Both of them are dark and both of them are larger than life. So in Tantra, there's a very beautiful concept where the Dashavtar of Lord Vishnu are related with the Dash Mahavidyas, which are different forms of Kali. But we're not getting into that right now. For Kalki's story, there's a romance between him, who will be born in Shambhal, which will probably be in Tibet, based on the Tibetan scriptures. According to Hindu scriptures, the location is not given, but a lot of people believe it will somewhere be probably in Uttar Pradesh, because I think there's a town of that name there. But the Tibetan prophecies believe that the king would be born in Tibet, in Shambhal. And the princess that he's going to marry would be from Sri Lanka, the country that we were discussing earlier. So, there's a cross-country romance, and, how they interact, it's through a parrot. And, so it's an interesting story.
Like Twitter?
Yeah, a talking parrot, probably like Twitter. So
God, I mean, I'm constantly trying to draw out the modern day parallels. Like, we're already in such a modern world where we're talking about the internet and crypto and the metaverse. That I'm just trying to figure where this could fit in.
Definitely. It's quite obvious. It's quite probable that there would be some amount of technology involved in this.
Like, I believe Nostradamus, when he had predicted World War II, he predicted the fighter jet bombers as being controlled by flying pigs, which was actually a representation of the kind of masks they wore.
Yes.
So, with these predictions, it's always like metaphorical.
Yes.
It's never literal.
Of course. A person predicting or writing, even the Purans, they are the future Purans. Like Kalki Puran talks about the future. These are the events that are going to happen. So, of course, there's a bit of rationalization that you need to do when you're reading these stories and when you are trying to understand these stories, because they were written in a previous time by somebody who was not fully aware of how things would be in the future. So whatever visions the person received which is Ved Vyas who's written the Puran. So whatever visions he received of the future, he has described according to those. So there are, so Devdutt is the horse that he's going to ride, which is sort of a flying horse. There's very interesting mentions of them crossing the same bridge that Rama had created to reach Lanka. So they return back to the mainland through that bridge.
Do you 100% believe that Sri Lanka is Lanka?
So it's hard to say. I would say it's hard to say.
Let's highlight that a little bit.
Sure, because I feel, there's the distance is not as much as mentioned in the scriptures. Distance between Indian mainland and Sri Lanka is actually, I don't think it's 100 yojans, which the Valmiki Ramayana mentions.
Again, need to highlight the Ice Age.
Yes.
And highlight how there were probably interoceanic islands which are now hidden.
Definitely.
As in what we call tectonic plates now.
Yes.
Could have been slightly exposed because water levels were a lot lower then.
Yes. And it also ties up with the belief that this is not from this current cycle. Ramayana was from the 24th Mahayuga. So what was the coastline of India or Sri Lanka at that time? It's very hard to say. And in fact, the Tamil literature, the Sangam literature, it actually mentions a continent called Kumari Kandam, which existed. And certain scholars have kind of postulated that it linked Madagascar and Sri Lanka to Indonesia.
Wow.
So it was a huge continent below the southern tip of India. It's a possibility. You never know how the sea line, how the shoreline was.
That could have been Sri Lanka. I mean, that could have been Lanka.
Possible. But, for all practical purposes, we have to understand that it was separated from the Indian mainland. It was a separate island. That's all we know. And
I wonder if from a geopolitical scenario, the British called Sri Lanka to create a divide and rule mentality between the Hindu...
They actually called it Ceylon. So it may have come from the same name, anglicized version, but there's a possibility.
What do Lankans call themselves? Sri Lankans?
Sinhala. So the island is Sinhala, and in Kalki Puran it is mentioned as Sinhala.
Okay.
So at least for Kalki, we know that his bride would come from Sinhala. And so there's that. And then there's massive fights between Kalki and the disbelieving rulers of different continents. So people who do not believe in Vedic principles or the principles of Hinduism. So these are termed Malech in the scriptures. And these are the barbarians, or these are the unbelievers whom Kalki will be fighting. And there's a very interesting mention of two subordinates of Kali, the demon.
Can we sit on this Hinduism thing? Because this is the first time I'm hearing about a story that talks about people who don't believe in Hinduism from Hinduism. I'm of the belief that you should be free to believe in whatever faith you want.
Right.
Because that's your subjective reality.
Right.
Did the scriptures mention exactly this, that it's against Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism, or did they just say something like against Dharma, which could just mean ethics?
So see, the scriptures actually talk about unbelievers, and unbelievers or disbelievers are the ones, traditionally, they are considered those. So in Hinduism, there's schools of thought, different schools of thought, different philosophies, right? So the orthodox philosophies are considered the ones that consider Vedas as supreme.
Okay.
They may follow their own path, but they do not disbelieve in Vedas. And the heretical ones or the heterodox ones are the philosophies that do not believe in Vedas. So the scriptures, when they're talking about disbelievers or unbelievers, they're talking about people who do not believe in the supremacy of Vedas or the authenticity of Vedas. So that could mean anything, right? In modern world, it could mean anything. But that's what the scriptures mention.
Yeah. Maybe my gauge for the modern world on a personal level is just kindness. Like...
Of course, see, things change, principles change, principles of religion change. And I think a lot of modern religions have that kindness aspect ingrained, at least the followers do, even if the original religious, tenets may not have stressed on them so forcefully. Today, we all understand that, being nice to your fellow, being your neighbor and helping the society grow is what religion is supposed to do. It is supposed to bring people together and it is supposed to bring people closer to God. And in Indian thought, the way to come closer to God, the best way to come closer to God is through helping the fellow souls achieve that stage of enlightenment also. That is why you have so many examples of saints and sages who could have easily attained salvation, but they stayed back. They did not work only for their own salvation. They imparted knowledge to people to uplift the entire society, bring it to a God consciousness. And that is why in Indian thought, there's always this fight between believers and disbelievers. So because the Indian thought is that you have to, there's a bigger purpose to life. Bringing people upwards is great, which is your karma, which is karma yoga, frankly, right? Whatever position you are in society, you fulfill that to the best of your abilities. That is the karma yoga.
The ones around you.
Helping the ones around you, fulfilling your responsibilities to your family, to your society, to your friends, to your work, everything. That's karma yoga. But you do it with a thought that I'm doing this for God. So the belief in God has to be there. Whenever there is a belief that I am doing it, that is not karma yoga. That is a sense of ego or entitlement.
Maybe this is what I draw from what you said, that rather than them saying no, anti-Hinduism will be targeted, it's much more non-godly people be targeted.
Yes. And so the fights with these kings, and they are all described very vividly. And, there's two subordinates of Kali that are very interesting, called Koka and Vikoka. And they're very interesting. They're two demons who can be killed only if they're killed together. Otherwise, they will not die. If you kill one of them, and it's a very interesting fight. So I don't want to reveal everything. I would like people to read the Kalki Puran. It's a short book, and it's interesting. It's an interesting story.
Okay. What do you think that could mean? People who can't die?
I feel, it's some sort of a symbiotic being, where
quantum particles.
Yes, quite possible. Or it could be, the entire story of Kali and Kalki could take us into the AI zone, for all you know. They could be automatons or robotic beings, who are connected to each other, and the source is in one. It's like Horcruxes and all that. This one will not die till the other one is also killed. So there could be so many different interpretations to that.
Yeah, or it could be in a quantum realm entirely. You never know.
Quite possible.
Wild ideas with Dr. Agarwal. So while this podcast began with 5 steadfast flagpoles, I think we've gone all over the place and just given people a free-flowing conversation on the subject, which I actually prefer in podcasts. Maybe, to describe this kind of larger-than-life aspect of Kalki, what I'd also like to highlight is lots of modern-day scholars consider the Vishnu Puran to be a commentary on human evolution. In terms of, if you see the first avatar, it was a fish.
Right.
The second avatar was
Kurma.
A tortoise. Amphibian.
Yeah.
The third one was a boar.
Yes.
And then progressively, you kept getting slightly more evolved avatars. The fourth one after the boar was Narsimha.
Narsimha was half man and half animal.
Yeah.
And then you have the Vaman, which is sort of the primitive man, the pygmy.
The pygmy, yeah.
And then you move to Parshuram,
which is
the jungle-dwelling man, forest-dwelling man, because he was not living in the society. He had an axe, right? So the tools, primitive tools were getting developed. Then you move to civilization with Ram and Krishna.
With Ram, who's a king in a civilized society.
Yes.
A simple society which believed in God, etc.
Yes.
You have Krishna, who is a king in a overly civilized society where there is also enmity between people, enmity within families. Like a more corrupted society.
Yes.
Then I want to ask you this whole Buddha angle. You had mentioned that some scriptures talk about Buddha, some don't. What's the angle there? Because I know that there's a lot of Hindus who consider Buddha to be the 9th avatar. I have nothing to say. I have no opinion here because I haven't read the scriptures enough, honestly. What do the scriptures say about Buddha being a part of Hinduism? And this isn't a Buddhism versus Hinduism battle. I feel we're all one at the end of the day, especially when we talk about Indian cultures.
Yes.
There's no such thing as Buddhism better than Hinduism or Hinduism better than Buddhism. It's just a commentary on knowledge seeking.
Right. I think there are a lot of scriptures that mention, it's not up to you or me to decide whether he was an incarnation or not. It's what the scriptures say. a lot of scriptures do mention Buddha. And, all that I would say is that, please try and research a little. People who say that Buddha was not an incarnation, you can easily find references from scriptures that do mention Buddha. Some people argue that there are 2 or 3 different Buddhas mentioned, but every time they are mentioned as an incarnation.
Okay. What do you mean 2 or 3 different Buddhas?
So there are different timelines, different Buddhas emerged, for different purposes.
Wow.
So some places, some scriptures that they mention that Buddha was born in Gaya. So some people argue that, Buddha was not born in Gaya, so this is not that Buddha. So there are different arguments that people have against Buddha being a part of the list. But there are many scriptures who do consider him in the list. And I feel, instead of finding differences and, creating differences, we should find common ground between the religions.
Like, for example, like I got into Buddhism heavily recently, and I've grown up being a very pious Hindu boy, genuinely. But I feel there's a lot to learn from Buddhist teachings, and it is slightly different from Hindu teachings. It's not, it doesn't clash with any Hindu teachings. It just adds some supplemental value.
Right.
For example, just this pursuit of taking over your own mind, being able to control your own mind.
Right.
This concept is spoken about in Hinduism, but it's spoken about so much more in Buddhism. Where there's this famous quote from the Buddha that says that if you learn to, that a man who learns how to control his mind is greater than one who can win 1,000 battles.
Definitely.
And that's so true. And it's so important for the times that we live in, where we talk about anxiety, overthinking, panic attacks.
Yes.
The angle here is it's your mind and your intelligence working against you.
Right.
It's the same thing as what Sadhguru says, which are teachings of Shiva and all that, but we don't speak about those teachings enough in the modern day. So there's a lot of relevant teachings that I've actually figured from Buddhism. It's sort of higher spiritual studies. Of course, all these things must be present in Hinduism and all that, but 2 angles here. One, not enough texts have been converted from Sanskrit into English.
Or even if they have been converted, people haven't been exposed to them.
Yeah.
That is the issue.
And that's the second one.
Yes. And I'll just highlight one difference between the 2 philosophies is that, in these philosophies like Buddhism and Jainism, asceticism is a virtue, So you can, the highest goal is to leave this world, become an ascetic, Spiritually, advancement needs you to become a hermit or have a hermetic approach towards life. In Hinduism, this was an inclusive concept. I would say, in these philosophies that are considered heterodox philosophies, these are not orthodox philosophies that came up along with Hinduism in ancient India around 500, 600 BC. That, these philosophies, they laid more stress on living a life of seclusion, on controlling your senses. In Hinduism, the focus was on dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. It was not just moksha. It was a holistic life, the varna ashram dharma, which is 4-fold division of everything. So you learn in brahmacharya, you learn about the scriptures, you learn the basic concepts, right? In grihastha ashram, you earn money, you enjoy the carnal pleasures of life, your conjugal relationships and everything. In the vanprasth, you learn to detach yourself from everything. And in sannyas is your ascetic life. So in Hinduism, there was a gradual progression towards asceticism. Whereas in these philosophies, it was a sudden movement. The moment you get enlightenment, leave everything and go. That is what Buddha did, right? So,
or the moment you get the inspiration to chase it.
Yeah. So in Hinduism, always it has been a gradual progress. Hinduism never looked down upon sannyasis. So, there's a belief that, these religions are always at loggerheads. There was friction between them historically. There must have been friction because they're different philosophies ultimately, fighting for supremacy. And Vedanta ultimately won, in India because of debates and because of Adi Shankaracharya and a lot of other bhakti movement came into play and all that.
What do you mean one? As in like the masses adopted Hinduism more than...
Yes, the principle. See, for any society to survive, you need a certain population to be involved in economic pursuits, a certain set of population involved in protecting the country. If everybody becomes a sannyasi, how will the society survive, right? So there was a positive way to look at things. And there's no differentiation between the teachings, in the sense that, we all talk about your salvation. In Buddhism, salvation means something else, and Hinduism means something else. But we are all talking about salvation, right? But in Hindu philosophy, the fourfold division of Varna, Ashram, Dharma, it helped a person experience everything which the world has to offer, get experiences, get the knowledge from the scriptures, from the gurus, as a householder, perform duties. Who will sustain the society if you don't marry? If the society will not continue, right? If you don't perform yagnas, if you don't do, temple worship or give dan, so how will these people survive? How will the mendicants survive? Because the sannyasis, they don't earn, right? For sannyasis to survive, there has to be a householder. Right? For them to survive. For Vanpras, people who have gone to the forest to survive, they have to be, their family to look after their needs. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The Varna, Ashram, Dharma, everybody looked after each other.
And I believe Buddhism kind of spread and grew because of adapting to the countries that it spread to.
Yes.
So in China, it
Yes.
adopted Chinese philosophies as well, mixed it with Buddhism.
Yes.
In Tibet, it adopted Bon philosophies and
Yes.
adapted with Tibet.
Yes.
Same with Japan.
Yes.
Same with Sri Lanka.
Definitely. If you actually see the Buddhism practice in Sri Lanka, it's very different from what is practiced in Tibet. So, the Theravada school and the Mahayana school and the Vajrayana school, they're very different in their approach.
Coming back to Kalki again, we spoke about Krishna and how he was a king within a corrupted society. The next evolution of man is the enlightened man, which was Buddha,
Yes.
according to the scriptures.
If you believe in the Dashavatar, again, we're not going back to that controversy whether he was not a part of it. But if you believe in it, it shows that, Buddha mostly talked about following the middle path, which Krishna has also mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. But Buddha highlighted it that, you follow the middle path. In fact, a lot of people don't know that the earliest depictions of Buddha in Indian art are of an emaciated sadhu, because he went to an extreme while doing tapasya. He forgot eating. He was completely turned into a skeleton, while attaining enlightenment. And that's when he started preaching the middle path, that you have to avoid extremes. Don't indulge completely in sensual pleasures. Don't do complete mortification of your body. Follow the middle path, which allows your body to remain, in a healthy state, and you follow whatever religious thoughts you want to follow.
Would it be fair to say that the Kalki avatar, which is the 10th avatar, is the form of man beyond being enlightened?
Definitely.
Which is an astral being?
Very, very likely, it means something in respects of evolution, which we haven't really even thought about,
Like, did the early Homo sapien think that we'd one day be able to build rocket ships and leave this planet and go to the moon?
So it's at a level that we can't even imagine right now. And possibly, I would say it has to do with your mental progression, the evolution of your brains. Because our bodies have evolved into whatever they were meant to be, right? We still have a lot of vestigial organs within our body, like the appendix, etc., which don't serve any purpose, which clearly shows that our bodies have evolved. So what is left to see is the mental progression. A lot of scientists say that, we do not use a lot of our mental capacities. It's only 10% or 20% of the brains that we use, which may or may not be strictly true. But it's safe to say that there's a lot more that needs to be understood of our mental faculties, So I think this evolution will come in the form of the field of telekinesis or teleportation or some siddhis that, we talk about in the scriptures.
Which are occult kind of
abilities. They could be occult, or they could just be harnessing the power of your mind. They may not be very sinister, or they do not have to be, mystical powers. It could just be the use of your brain in a better way, to understand your environment, to understand the universe, and utilize those sciences. What are we doing today? We are utilizing the electromagnetic radiation that's all around us for the telecast, for internet, for our cellular phones, for everything. These are things that are already existing. Once we found out about them, we started using them, right? So maybe it's about an evolution stage where our mental faculties can also be similarly tapped into.
And all engineering arises from science, and science arises from creativity.
Right.
All scientists have actually been creative professionals who have done a lot of guesswork and a lot of hypothesizing
Right.
before they actually chase a scientific chase.
Definitely.
In saying that, when we read about these studies about meditation, which is what the Buddha did to get to enlightenment, we also find that along this process of long-term meditation, you have long-term effects on your brain, like your
Yes.
corpus callosum thickens,
Yes.
therefore your processing power of your brain
Yes.
increases.
Yes.
The size of your amygdala reduces slightly.
Yes.
I think it's like the activation of your amygdala reduces. Your amygdala is responsible for all your fear responses.
Yes.
So basically what that means in the long term is a sense of self-belief increases,
Right.
your calm increases, and you see this with people who meditate a lot.
Right.
They are slightly different.
Yes.
That's all I'd like to say. It's not about being elevated or not. They're just calmer.
Yes. And probably Buddha showed that, right? His entire life, when you see he's reacted very differently to the situations, right, than a normal person. Even the story of Angulimal, where that person is coming with a sword to cut his finger, and the way he responds, the way he handles that situation is very, very suggestive of an enlightened person. And Kalki would be one next level, where it is not just the spiritual enlightenment, your control over your material environment, but your mental faculties, probably a hint of AI as well, for all you know, because now internet connects everybody. The next, futuristic science or sci-fi concepts are about the synthesis of humans and machines. Who knows what it could be?
Yeah. If you feed enough information into AI, it becomes what people call sentient, which means it has feelings, it has emotions.
Yes.
Again, I don't know much about AI, and actually that's the next domain we've been trying to tap with this podcast.
Right.
I don't know how many listeners we'll get on those episodes, even if we get fantastic AI professionals. Usually these engineering technology based conversations don't get as many listeners for some reason. But in saying that, I would agree with you, because we know that biotech is also evolving so much. We've done a few biotech conversations with Dr. Sid Warrior. Everything from 3D printing to stem cell research to AI to nanobots. All these technologies are being developed, which effectively means that machines are going to become a part of our bodies as well.
Yes. They're definitely going to enhance our capabilities, and you never know. Kalki could be somebody who has immense powers because of these abilities, because of availability of these abilities. So there's a thought,
Dr. Agarwal, how would you like to end this conversation?
Well, I think the last conversation also was on Kalki. It ended on the note for Kalki, and I think I would like to repeat that reiteration. That the belief in Messiah is great. We want to believe that somebody will come to save us, but I feel it is imperative that we start living a life where we do not need to be saved. As a society, as a culture, I'm not talking about Indians, or I'm talking about the world, the globe. Everywhere we should be working towards achieving that Kalki within ourselves, where we can take care of things. We do not need an external savior to come and set things right for us. Why can't we do it?
That's
taking
a beautiful
small
way
steps,
of looking at it.
baby steps, whatever each person can do. Plant a tree, help an orphan, save a stray animal, adopt a stray animal, or there's so many small things that we can do. Save on electricity, cut down on your power usage, cut down on the fuel usage, use public transport. They sound very cliche, when you say it, but they are practical steps that we can do to help our environment.
Keeping in mind Sri Ram, who was all about ethics, keeping in mind Krishna, who was all about dharma, which is doing the right thing, even if it means doing a few wrong things. Keeping in mind the Buddha, who reminds us to meditate and to spiritually evolve. This is the final message of God, which is proactiveness. That wherever you can, you get the job done. If you see something wrong happening in the world, go address it. Definitely. If you see the opportunity for good to be done, you go do it.
Right.
That's probably a nice
finding the Kalki within ourselves. That is the
intense. I'd like to end this by saying that you look a lot like Rahul Dravid, and I never told you that.
So many times.
Like, I wanted to tell you that outside, but I was like, no,
He was my favorite
Yeah?
cricketer, and he is still. So yeah, I always take it as a compliment.
Plus, even the way you talk, there's a lot of resemblance. And these random moments in the middle of the podcast, I was smiling. I was actually thinking of that. but that's the end of this episode. We were supposed to do an other episode today, but I think we'll just stick to one
Yeah.
and leave the audience guessing what the next one could possibly be. It's an interesting topic.
Yes.
We're doing Matas the next time. No more guessing for you guys.
No patience.
Dr. Agarwal, thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Anvi.
So that was the episode for today. As I've said earlier on this podcast, the intention with this show now is to take it international. They say that human beings need food, shelter, clothing, and stories. And we're a land full of stories. And often it's very, very deep philosophy that's packed into these stories. As a podcaster, when you are talking to someone who's extremely well-read, it's also an exchange of ideas. It's never just questions from your side. There's elements of yourself that you bring to the table as a podcaster, and there's elements of your own philosophies, the beliefs that you have, the thoughts that you get to reflect upon, that you get to analyze through these conversations. The fact that I get to do it in front of an audience like yourselves makes this experience of podcasting even more enriching. It's one of the biggest blessings of my life. I've got offers from other industries to take up business full time, to get into acting, but there's a part of me that can't leave podcasting because of conversations like this. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. What I will request of you is that you share it as much as possible, especially with NRIs, non-resident Indians, especially with people from other countries, other parts of society that are fascinated by India. There's so much to unpack from our great culture. This was just a small highlight. And for more conversations like this, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. This was a fantastic episode with Dr. Vineet Agarwal on TRS. We'll be back soon.